Because if you can't pay your tax and you're losing money, you don't have a business.
What number would you give it?
This one, you're probably talking about up there around a 9 out of 10.
Our collective choice as an economy, a society, to become a housing market with bits tacked on.
This episode brings in new voices, economists, business owners, and a social scientists. I ask, are we actually broke as a country, or is that a false narrative?
In the last decade, 2010 to 20, the net outflow would be 3,000, but of course it's now peaked at somewhere in the mid 40,000s.
They're not closing the businesses.
They totally are.
Well, Stalin had a plan that didn't go so well. Pol Pot had a plan that didn't go so well, did it? Messy democracies tend not to have plans.
Is New Zealand being forced to finally build a real economy beyond housing?
We've always had a real economy beyond housing. I think that's always been a bit of a myth.
He's now turning over 30 grand plus a month cleaning cars at the age of 18 and signed 2 leases in Wellington. But you got the media and stuff being like, oh, it's all doom and gloom in Wellington, nothing's happening. You go, well, how's this kid doing it?
Today's episode is brought to you by AcademyEx, New Zealand's premier postgraduate institute for business owners and professionals. They're an absolute game changer for New Zealand business owners and professionals who are ready to stop talking about the next level and actually build the skills to get there. You can hit the link below or scan the QR code on your screen to learn more about AcademyEx.
We need to stop telling myths about ourselves. We need to be clear-headed and truthful with ourselves about the challenges we face, including becoming poorer, and actually do something about them, have some bravery politically and in civil society to confront them for what they are and to say we need to change.
When you're thinking about shock, I'm thinking about a seismic shock, an earthquake, where there's a number. If you had to assign a number to the Asian financial crises, the global financial crises, the COVID, and now that, what number would you give it?
Well, if you're doing if I was doing the Asian financial crisis, nowadays I'd probably look at that if you're doing it out of 10, maybe about a 3.
Right. Okay. That's quite light.
Yes,
That's
in retrospect, it feels like it now. Like the global financial crisis, that was up probably around about a 6 or a 7.
Right.
The Canterbury earthquakes were a lot more localised, but very profound there.
Yeah.
COVID was a major shock. You'd put that around an 8 or a 9, but the thing was it ended up being short-lived, which was a real saving grace.
Right. Yeah.
This one, you're probably talking about up there around a 9 out of 10 from the point of view of if you were thinking about one of the worst things you could have happen, it's probably, right, well, let's shut off global oil supplies to many countries because it's a hard one to step around. I
definitely agree. Like investing in, and especially investing in Kiwi podcasts and Kiwi creators, because we want to invest in each other and we're trying to help build the economy in New Zealand. So why would you go and give Meta a lot of money and, invest in Kiwi creators and invest in people who are working really hard. So I agree. How has podcasting changed you as a human?
I love it. It's made me more curious. It's made me more open to how people see things. I've always been a bit like that. I often say that I would, probably have liked to have studied psychology. I have my own opinions and views, but I'm always captivated. Like, why does somebody think like that? And with a podcast, you get a bit of a chance to do that. You build a community of amazing people. I was speaking to a jeweler the other day. He said, I saw Ilse Wolf, your podcast guest in the cafe the other day, the lady who does all the property stuff. I went up to her and I introduced myself and she said, oh, lovely to meet you. And she ended up coming into my jeweler store. I'm just like, man, how cool is that?
Yeah.
I get that every week,
It's like a conversation starter.
Yeah. And then I get, I speak to a lot of the podcasters. So I'll talk to the Between Two Beers boys as an example and get to hear some of the things that are happening in the undercurrent of their podcast. And that's the stuff that we don't often see, but that's the true value of podcasting. People connecting through these different communities or seeing themselves in the same shoes as the person being interviewed and going, wow, if they can do it, why not me? And I think that's the really incredibly powerful piece of it. I've tried to use it to find Kiwi people that are doing things so that I can plant seeds for other Kiwi people to go, oh, maybe like Max Tibbs, I could start cleaning cars, and he's now turning over 30 grand plus a month cleaning cars at the age of 18 and signed 2 leases in Wellington. But you got the media and stuff being like, oh, it's all doom and gloom in Wellington, nothing's happening. You go, well, how's this kid doing it? So just breaking a little bit of that narrative and opening people's eyes to what's possible. But also, it's probably just growing my brand, It's taught me to speak better. I now get paid to speak on stage. It's something that I was working towards. I should do. I was hoping to, but I'll probably just come short. So I don't want to say I will, but I'll come short just of doing 6 figures of speaking in 2025. Which is pretty incredible. You know, when I growing up as a young fella, I thought if I could make $100,000 in a year, I'd just be investing all that into the stock market and be minted and sort of semi-retired. But now, you know, I can, you know, potentially make $100,000 this year or close to from speaking. And you think it just blows your paradigm of what's actually possible.
Isn't it? It opens up so many doors, isn't it?
There's a bunch of reasons for that, but the main one is that our collective choice as an economy, a society, to become a housing market with bits tacked on, which is what we really chose to do in the 1990s. Without really understanding it, we sort of stumbled into it. And for a long time, it worked really well. You know, if you owned property and if you bought property from really the 1990s onwards through the 2000s and the 2010s, and in that amazing period in 2019-20, when the market went absolutely nuts, it felt like, well, this is the right way to do it. This is great. We've got all of this leveraged tax-free capital gains. You know, why would you invest in anything else? Just buy another rental property or buy another house or just sit there and wait for the value of the land to rise.
I think that's always been a bit of a myth. You know, we are quite obsessed with property, and a lot of our wealth is tied up in property. So roughly speaking, about half of our wealth is tied up in property. That's very high. And that means that we're not investing in other things that would actually make us richer. You know, like my personal belief has always been that you cannot expect to create good jobs and prosperous society if you don't create good businesses that create those opportunities, right? You know, buying and selling houses from each other is a necessity. We got to have shelter, but it doesn't create jobs. It doesn't create that long-term prosperity. So New Zealand is still not doing that very well. We are still more likely to borrow money to buy and sell a house from each other rather than to build a new house or build a new business. And that has remained a problem for us.
New Zealand stock market, poorly performing, dreadful performance over the last 10 years. What are we doing about making sure that KiwiSaver accounts can invest more in the New Zealand stock market rather than the US stock market? That's the policy problem that we need to sort out. Far too often, in my mind, for every complex problem, there's a bright, shiny, simple solution that's wrong. And capital gains taxes is a good example of that for me.
Interesting. So the stock market, what could happen? I mean, why haven't we sorted it out in the last 10 years?
A whole bunch of reasons. We're small, obviously, and we've got, because of the nature of our economy, our stock market is dominated by companies that actually aren't all that entrepreneurial. You know, Meridian, it's a power company. I mean, it should be a very conservative thing, and yet it's one of the biggest companies on our stock exchange. So I can't invest in Nvidia. I can't invest in Microsoft in our stock exchange. I'm going to have to invest in Auckland Airport.
Yeah.
Once again, a monopoly, right? Or Mercury. I mean, really, they're lovely companies.
Yeah.
But I personally don't invest much in them because they're defensive companies. I want to, even at my age and stage, I want to invest in growth. And there's far too few companies on the New Zealand Stock Exchange that are growth focused and that I can see could really tow things forward. And that's what you're seeing really as you look at the New Zealand stock market. It's not something that people invest in, and you can see that through the performance of it.
I think in terms of strategy at a government level and a business level, I'd almost rather the wrong strategy than no strategy. You know, I think wrong decisions executed well with a conviction can do good. You know, at a level they might be suboptimal, they might not be what I'd choose. And so, if we're talking about just some specifics, and there'd be others we could think about, but if we think about some specifics that I've done a bit of thinking about, and I've been New Zealand's energy minister. I mean, one would be if we're talking cost of living and that issue of survival. I think some very clear reforms in the energy system. To over time see much more supply of energy in New Zealand, and therefore in supply and demand terms cheaper energy for consumers, households, and for businesses. I think that's a really important area, like quite close to the top of economic issues.
Because investment often helps. You know, be cautious about that because often businesses in New Zealand that appear successful on the outside are only viable because they have at times relied on equity withdrawal from the home to fund a small business. So a lot of businesses can't borrow, directly from the bank against their business revenues or their business assets. They can only borrow against the house they live in or the houses they own. And that works fine when the house price is going up. The bank will just lend you more equity, and you might even have a revolving credit situation on your house. But when house prices stop going up, that becomes a problem. And that's the other moment of truth for a lot of small businesses in the last 3 or 4 years, is not only are they finding it difficult to get finance to get through a rough patch, or maybe to, expand if that's what they wanted to do. But those people will also find it difficult to expand and get finance for their needs. And unfortunately, there was a period in 2020, 2021 through to 2022 when the IRD turned a blind eye to various tax debts, late repayments of COVID loans, people paying their GST late, people accidentally missing their PAYE. And the government has enabled the IRD over the last 2 years to be much more aggressive. So to basically put people out of business. So in any sort of wind-up situation for a small business, the IRD is always at the front of the queue. They're the ones who have to get repaid first. And they're the ones actually who are triggering more than 60% of the liquidations, bankruptcies, asset procedures that are going through at the moment, which are at a 15-year high.
So when the tax bill can't be paid, what does a business owner need to do? When you can't pay.
Call me.
Really? Is that what they need to do?
There are options. So if you can't pay your tax, if your business is losing money and you can't pay your tax, shut it down. Just go and do something else. Because if you can't pay your tax and you're losing money, you don't have a business. But if a very common situation is for people to get into business, or their business is going well and then they have a quiet patch, as it happened in COVID, and then the business now moves back into the black. Hey, that's pretty cool. And they think, I'll make it up in the next month. And to be fair, a lot of the time they do. People miss a payment and then they catch up the following months. Same with the landlord, whatever. Pretty common for small business. But with the Inland Revenue Department, the problem is that the debt escalates really quickly. So if you miss a payment on PAYE GST, then they have what's called interest and penalties. So a $100 debt can become $200, can become $300 because it builds on itself. And so you miss 1 month, you might catch up the following month, but that month you didn't pay, the interest penalties keep accruing on that. So it gets very ugly very fast. But then they should talk to their accountant or
If this episode has you wondering whether your company that you're in is actually making use of emerging tech and is on the top of the game, it's time to stop guessing, because AcademyEx has built a 12-week training program for hands-on AI software development. You or your team will learn how these systems work under the hood and build an actual prototype week by week alongside tech experts that are local. So imagine taking that software idea that you've been sitting on and you turn it into a real deployed tool that you can test on customers or pitch to your leadership team. You don't need to become a full-time developer. You just need the fluency to build things yourself or brief an agency properly so it gets things done right. So walk into the next strategy meeting with an actual product, not a shrug. So click the link below or scan the QR code on your screen to learn more about AcademyEx and their course. Application close on the 10th of September. Hello, thanks for watching this video. Quick note, have you subscribed? Over 90% of people who are watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify or on Apple are not subscribed or following. Please do so now. It's so simple. The button will be around the screen somewhere. You either hit subscribe or hit the follow button or leave me a review. That will help me so much, helps me grow as a channel and support my work. So I really appreciate it. Okay. Back to the episode.
We also have had a long history of people leaving the country. So for the last 30 years, there have only been 2 years when we haven't seen net outflows. But normally, in the last decade, 2010 to 20, the net outflow would be 3,000.
Mm-hmm.
But, of course, it's now peaked at somewhere in the mid-40,000s. And so I am very concerned about that.
I was just about to say, looking at New Zealand today, what worries you the most?
The lack of long-term planning. So I'm interested in our demography. I would argue that there's a new demography emerging. It began in about 2013, but it's really accelerated during the 2020s. And so this country is going to be quite different in the 2030s. In one sense, we're only catching up with a lot of other countries. So we're about 30 years behind Germany or Japan. You've mentioned declining fertility. We're down at about 1.5 at the moment, births per woman. Korea's down at 0.7. So there's countries that are seen a much greater fall. So in a sense, we're catching up with the rest of the high-income world. But I would argue that our demography, 10 years out, even 20 years out, we know pretty much what it's going to look like, and we need to do things differently. So what frustrates me is the lack of political understanding and the willingness of our political decision makers to think about what the implications are and to plan for them.
If this continues, what is going to quietly break in New Zealand first, do you think?
Say that again?
If this trend continue, this projection, if it continues, what is going to quietly break first?
I think there's a couple of things. I think the ageing of the society, and so we will quite soon be what's called an old dominant country, where over 20% are aged over 65. There are big chunks of the country which are seeing hyper-aging, which is more than 30% of the population aged over 65. And when you get, we'll as a country as a whole, we'll eventually plateau at around 25%. But when you think about the past, where around 7-8% of the population are aged over 65, and we're now talking about 20 or 25%, a lot of things change. And, of course, the costs go up. The costs of healthcare, the cost of superannuation, the cost of providing services and infrastructure for older people. And there's something called the old age dependency ratio, which is the ratio of people in work compared to those on superannuation, which over my lifetime, depending upon how long I live, will go from 6 to 1, 6 in paid work to 1, to possibly 2 to 1. So how can you afford the costs of an ageing society? So I think that's going to be very significant in terms of how we operate, how we generate income, particularly for the state, and then how we spend that income.
So there's a lot of big questions. Like, this is a podcast for business owners and entrepreneurs, and a typical 30-year-old entrepreneur who wants to start a life or start a business in New Zealand, should they or should they not right now?
I think they should. I mean, I'm not an economic expert.
We know, yes.
I'm a demographer. But, you always, when things are challenging, is the moment when you innovate.
Right.
And so don't spoil a good crisis is essentially my advice. So no, innovation, and we desperately need innovation in this country because we're very reliant in terms of a number of sectors, and of course the primary sector, which has done us really well over a long period and is continuing to contribute disproportionately to the well-being of this country. But we need to innovate. And I'm an orchard owner in Hawke's Bay. Yeah. So I'm part of that sector. But what strikes me when I look at our ports and I see all those logs going as logs overseas, my question is, why aren't we adding value in this country? And that applies to a lot of our primary sector products. So why can't we innovate in that way?
Right. And my advice to all my clients over the last couple of years is go cut your competition's lunch. There is no growth happening in the economy. Any growth you have in this market is because you've taken somebody else's market share. And one of the most frustrating things I see during downturns is people stop advertising, people stop marketing, and you're like, what are you doing? This is your own only competitive advantage in this market. If you're not doing that, you're shooting yourselves in the foot. And in fact, we know all the evidence is really clear. If your share of voice is high during a downturn, not only will you do better through the downturn, you will get an outsized share of the recovery when it comes. So those who haven't invested in marketing and advertising for the last couple of years are going to find that they're playing out of luck if and when the recovery comes.
Hey, that's pretty cool. And they think, I'll make it up in the next month. And to be fair, a lot of the time they do. People miss a payment and then they catch up the following months. Same with the landlord, whatever, pretty common for small business. But with the Inland Revenue Department, the problem is that the debt escalates really quickly. So if you miss a payment on PAYE GST, then they have what's called interest and penalties. So a $100 debt can become $200, can become $300 because it builds on itself. And so you miss 1 month, you might catch up the following month, but that month you didn't pay, the interest and penalties keep accruing on that. So it gets very ugly very fast. But then they should talk to their accountant or
Just my caution for people at the moment is don't rely too heavily on, say, a particular forecast or review. Think more of the general story behind what is going on and the risks. And if you're running a business, one of the best things to do at the moment is think through different scenarios, like what might be an okay scenario, what will be like a bad scenario, what could be the worst case scenario, and understand what that might look like for your business, and think about what actions you might need to take if you find you're going down one path over another, because that's a lot more useful than people like me sitting here going, trying to pick a date in an environment which is so fluid. So it's better to be planning and thinking about how you might respond.
I recognise that, to a lot of businesses, there'll be better days, and I think what I would encourage businesses to do is really sit there, think about where things are going. Don't try and boil the ocean, I think is the phrase. Don't try and do everything. Don't go too big. Think about what are the 3 or 4 things you're going to focus on every day to really get your business going better. I think if you do that, you've got not only real hope, you've got a very credible prospect of doing those things and making a real success of it, and chunking them off one at a time. Look, we're not going to, in my pet food business, solve the 17 things we could. We talked at a strategy day recently about whether we should be launching new products and doing this. No, we're going to focus on the few things. And actually, one of those, therefore, was to make of our 3 or 4 goals, one of the goals happen, or we need the goat meat. Right, and I can chunk that off, and I reckon we'll have goat meat in place, a couple of tons a month, very shortly. So I think robust thinking about the future. What are the 3 or 4 things you're going to do? Get up every day and try and make those happen. If you do that, look, I think you look back at the end of 2026 and say, you know what, actually, that worked for me. I'm in a better place today than I was at the start of 2026. So I hope that's maybe, I don't know if that's a bit eerie, but I hope that's something that maybe if you were listening and you got to the end of this, well done.
Yeah, good job.
Maybe you can take something from that.
I openly say my kids should leave New Zealand and go to Australia. And I actually expect at some point that I'm going to get that phone call from my daughters. I have 2 daughters, one's 31, one's 22. They have great degrees. They're living in Wellington, can't get jobs, are living in awful rental accommodation, are in danger of being stuck here and scarred by this latest extended recession, particularly in Wellington, this latest, the problem of housing. And I'm sure I'll get a phone call one day. It says, Dad, I've decided to go and move to Australia with my friends because they've already gone. And after they've been there for a while, Dad, I'm pregnant. And then what do I do? And like a lot of people in New Zealand, I'll go too. And what I'm saying is, if we want to do better than that, if we want to actually have a society where people want to stay and build something substantial and expect that their kids will stay and that they'll be able to watch their grandkids grow up here, then change it, because what we're doing at the moment is not working.
Like, the reason why I choose to live in this country is because I think we can do better, and New Zealand has a huge amount of potential. And I don't think we can wait for some future government or some leader who's going to do it. We have to ask ourselves, what can I do to make things different? And so each of these little opportunities that we create, each of these businesses that we create or communities that we create is where the change starts to happen. We can't go top down. I think we have to go bottom up. I'm impatient. I don't want to wait. And what that looks like is we want to have people who see their leadership potential and invest in their own leadership. Because your focus in your audience is mainly around business and business leadership, I think that's one of the biggest things we can do is invest in ourselves.